Why do you say that, Father? You aren't afraid, are you?
No, but I respect some of the superstitions of others. Often they are founded in fact.
Broadcasting from our Sanctum Sanctorum in Venice, California, this is the Sixth Sense Society. I'm your host, Krista, here with our producer, Michael, and we are excited to have on the show today Jaime Paul Lamb, who's going to be talking about the history of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. He's an astrologer and tarotist practicing in the context of the Western esoteric tradition. He's the author of 3 books on the subject of Freemasonry and Western esotericism. His work has also been featured in astrological journals and esoteric periodicals. He's also a co-host and co-founder of Tria Prima podcast. And he is a past master of Ascension Lodge number 89 and a frater of both a branch of a Rosicrucian Society in Arizona and the Hermetic Society of the Golden Dawn. So we think he's going to be a wonderful guest to talk about this topic. But before we get started, Michael has a few announcements.
Hi, everybody. We are recording this episode, but we will be on the live chat tomorrow when it premieres. So if you're watching live, then please chat with us, and we'll be happy to interact with you guys. We have a special episode coming up this Saturday, which will be our annual prediction show with our good astrologer friends, Caroline and Marnie, and our new numerologist friend, Carrie Jane. And that will be at 1 o'clock on Saturday. So it's a special time. It's a 2-hour episode. So join us for that as well. And we've got all kinds of other great stuff planned. Get all the information on our website, sixthsensesociety.com, SIXTH, all spelled out. While you're there, buy us a coffee on Ko-Fi. But most importantly, go to YouTube, click like and subscribe if you're watching us. And we're also available as a podcast. So if you're out and about, just go to anybody, Spotify, Apple, anywhere you go, Google, and just search Sixth Sense Society. Will pop right up. So you can listen when you're in the car and whatnot. So I don't want to take up too much time. So I'm going to kick it back to you guys. So take it away, Krista.
Great. Thank you, Michael, and welcome to the show, Jaime.
Hey, Krista and Michael, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and looking forward to some good conversation with you guys.
Yeah, I think it's going to be fascinating. I've always been fascinated with that period of time. I was talking to you before the show, the late 1890s, and you had the Theosophical Society starting, the Hermetic Golden Dawn. It was just really amazing. So let me ask you first, though, is how did you first get interested in the Golden Dawn yourself?
So it's funny, about maybe 15 years ago, I went to a film. I was living in Minneapolis. Could have been a little more than 15 years ago. I was in Minneapolis, and there was this film festival, just small film festival showing the films of Kenneth Anger and Jodorowsky. And I was a fan of both of their work. So I went to go see this, just a small showing inside of what turned out to be a temple. Now, it was an OTO temple, but I do remember going in there, and there was a tree of, I didn't know what this stuff was. There was a tree of life on the wall, and there were various trappings of, what I know now as this species of Western esotericism, this, these Victorian magical society trappings and things. Various, pillars and Kabbalistic things. And then I came to find out later that they were this, and I remember having a thought while I was just sitting there, again, not versed in this stuff. I thought to myself, this is vaguely golden dawny. And I don't know what made me think of that, other than perhaps I picked up the term from maybe Arthur Machen or reading Lovecraft or something like that. That must have been where I heard it, but that was my first inkling of Golden Dawn type stuff, And then it was just a couple years later that I got interested in Freemasonry. And, after, doing my studies there and kind of learning about that tradition, I happened into Rosicrucianism and then into the Golden Dawn tradition. So, and that was kind of the trajectory for me. It was Blue Lodge, what we call just regular craft masonry. And then I was initiated into the Societas Rosicruciana, or Societas Rosicruciana, in Civitatibus Federatus. That's the U.S. version of SRIA, from whence all those early Golden Dawn founders came. And then from there, it was just a short leap to starting on the Golden Dawn tradition. I had to, well, that's kind of an involved story. I had to kind of retrieve a charter from Victoria, British Columbia, and bring it down to Phoenix. So I had to do grades up there and then out in Austin, Texas as well, because we didn't have a body here in Phoenix. So we built this, from the ground up here in Phoenix.
Wow, that's great. That's a really interesting story. I think that it's possible. I mean, I don't know if you go for reincarnation, but I feel like people that have interest in the magical orders, whether it's Freemasonry or the Golden Dawn, could very well have been alive during that time. That is my own philosophy about it.
Well, sure. Yeah. I mean, there definitely was an instant attraction. Now, whether that was some sympathy from, a past that was, that I'm unconscious of, that could definitely be. I mean, or even if it is just some sort of, an affinity from some deeper level that I'm, just
Right.
not able to access consciously.
So let's start at the beginning then. It does seem like Freemasons were involved in the founding of the order. Isn't that true?
Yeah. So it was back, like you said, in the mid to late 1800s. Basically, in the London occult milieu at the time, there were people like Kenneth Mackenzie, Jonathan Yarker, Theodore Royce was sort of in that. All these people were collectors of rites. They were Masons, but they were also interested in elaborate rites like Memphis Mitzrayim and all the various. How we talk about Scottish Rite and York Rite and these things. So there were tons of these extant rites at that time. Some of which were being practiced, some were not, but they were basically traded among this group of essentially collectors and occult enthusiasts at the time. But the way it kind of really began with the Golden Dawn is Kenneth Mackenzie, who was the author of a certain Masonic encyclopedia. I know there are several, but he was the author of one of them, and he was in the circles with people like Hockley, Frederick Hockley. So they had this Society of Eight, they called it, and the biggest and brightest were in this Society of Eight. It was limited to 8 people, and amongst them they had certain correspondences. The body of correspondences that we attribute to Golden Dawn knowledge lectures, the teachings of the Golden Dawn, theoretical teachings. Well, these are the people, Hockley particularly, and Mackenzie, who sort of codified that. Now, where they got it, we don't know, because it is different from Eliphas Levi and the continental attributions, like say the Hebrew alphabet to tarot, which on the continent kind of come from Comte de Millet and Court de Jabeline, and then into Levy's work and et cetera. But that's a different body of correspondences. What you see in England at the time were the ones that we find in the Golden Dawn. So it essentially was, all of that knowledge was essentially reduced down to a set of what they call the cipher manuscript, which is a collection of, I think, about 60 folios.
Wow.
And when Mackenzie died, so here's how I think the real story, there's a couple stories on the beginning, but the one that I think is the most tenable is Mackenzie dies, and William Wynne Westcott, goes down to the south of England, like Brighton, one of the beach cities there, and talks to Mackenzie's widow. And under the pretense, I think, of getting these other documents for, I think it was Sat Baha'i, might have been the order that he was trying to get these rights. And but among those papers that he picked up after Mackenzie's death were those 60 folios, what we know now as the cipher manuscript. So he brought those back to London, and he was obviously very enthusiastic about this. And he brought them to Samuel Little McGregor Mathers, who was also a member of the SRIA, which is the Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia. And they got together and sort of turned it into a workable system. And Mathers had a lot to do with that. So yeah, that's where you really see the kind of the nucleus begin to form. The alternate story is they found the papers in the cipher manuscript in a bookstall, and there was an address in them for a woman, Fraulein Sprengel, they call her. Some people say Anna Sprengel, but I don't think the Anna is actually in the literature, but they say Fraulein Sprengel. And Westcott, I think, went to Germany, or at least contacted her somehow, and got permission to work this system that was ostensibly maybe 100 or 150 years old at that time. So a Rosicrucian tradition that likely, because it was in Germany, likely had some sort of connection to the Tübingen circle, you know, where we get the Fama Confessio and Chemical Wedding and this stuff. So I think they tried to make an unbroken lineal transmission through, you know, and they even brought in people like Rudolf Steiner to substantiate this in some way. And so that's the less tenable story than Westcott, you know, got the documents from.
Yeah, that's a story I think I heard of, the second one. I haven't heard the first story, and I think that's the one that does seem to get around a little bit in certain arenas of the esoteric world. Now, when it started, how did people join? What was the qualifications? What were their intentions of people joining the order?
So clearly this was a co-ed order, or not clearly, I mean, but it was, they wanted a co-ed order. So they basically, Mathers essentially took this material from Westcott, and I think Westcott even contracted him to work this into a system. Mathers obviously sort of built it on the chassis of the SRIA work, because if you look at it, it has that same Kabbalistic structure. So if you've ever seen, well, the Kabbalistic tree of life, each of those Sephirot correspond to a grade in the Golden Dawn system. So if you're in Malkut, that's the it's the Zealoter grade. And then if you're in Yesod, that's Theoricus, and then Practicus Philosophus, all the way up the tree, with the Neophyte grade being sort of off the tree. That's like a preliminary grade. But I bring this up because that grade structure, in fact, goes back to the Gold und Rosenkreuzer, I think it was actually called. And this is an 18th century Rosicrucian tradition in Germany, established by Freemasons, German Freemasons. Hermann Fichtuld and Simon Richter, I think, are the two names. Hermann Fichtuld and Simon Richter. And that's where we see the first iteration of that particular grade structure, the Kabbalistic grade structure. So back to your question, when they started to put this together, they wanted it to be a co-ed order. I'm not sure what the impetus was behind that, but I think it might have had something to do with competition with the Theosophical Society, particularly the ES, or esoteric section. So the Theosophical Society in London formed another group called the esoteric section, which did this more practical occultism at the time, as opposed to the, you know, kind of mystic philosophical fare of the regular Theosophical Society. There was also another kind of impetus at that time with Anna Kingsford and her Hermetic Society. So Anna Kingsford, and I forget the gentleman's name that worked under her, but obviously in Anna's group and in the Theosophical Society under Blavatsky, there were many women. You know, I think more women than men actually. So
Hmm.
they would be shooting themselves in the foot starting this new Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn if they did not make it co-ed.
Right.
They would not be competitive in that sense.
That's an interesting idea. I wondered why they were allowing women in, and it was one of the things that, I think was sort of innovative for the time. And also, I mean, I don't know if it was deliberate, but both tarot decks, two major tarot decks, Waite's deck worked with the female and Aleister Crowley worked with the woman. I don't know if it was deliberate or not, but it was an interesting idea of sort of the male-female energies working magically together.
Certainly, yeah. Pamela Coleman Smith with Waite, and I think it was Frida Harris with Crowley, working on the art, both of whom were initiates. Frida Harris actually also did a great kind of triptych of Masonic trestle boards.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of them. They're beautiful.
Oh,
Really.
they're my favorite trestle boards.
Yeah, I love them. I mean, they both were amazing in their own way. If you look at Pamela Coleman Smith's art in general and how young she was, but Lady Frida Harris is just an amazing artist because of the way her style of art and the Thoth tarot deck. It is interesting the amount of prestigious members in the Golden Dawn, and also I wanted your thoughts about how quite a few of them affected the culture in very significant ways.
Yeah, so there was among the luminaries that were in that first iteration of the Golden Dawn, what we say pre-schism Golden Dawn, you had Yeats, William Butler Yeats, who was a prominent poet and writer. There was Florence Farr, I think, who, she gets a lot of attention. She was part of the Sphere group. So even in the Golden Dawn, there were various cliques. So among the Adepti, she formed what was known as the Sphere group, which did interesting inner order work. But she was an actress. I think, a stage actress and
Yes.
very famous at that time. Of course, they had it's rumored that Arthur Conan Doyle was a member. I don't know if that's been substantiated, but that's rumored. Arthur Machen was a member. There were several, and they were, before that schism, and really before what's known as the Horos affair, which was sort of a PR nightmare that happened right around the schism. But before that, it was kind of chic. Before we came on today, we were talking about my background, and I thought something Egyptian would be appropriate because they were certainly riding this wave of Egyptomania in London, or probably the whole of UK, maybe even the world at that time, with E.A. Wallace Budge and his stolen property from Egypt, and
right.
So yeah.
One of my favorites was Annie Horniman, who established Abbey Theatre in Dublin, was a member too, and helped. I don't know. She helped produce some of one of Yeats' play, and I don't know. I found an essay once by Yeats about his connection to magic. I can't find it now, but he talks about how it helped with his writing in the long run, how it shaped and formed his thinking and his creativity, and Yeats certainly in the Irish tradition is a very influential writer and playwright and poet, like you said. So it's really fascinating the early stages of the Golden Dawn.
Yeah, I could see how it would sort of inform the creative person, just because there are activities such as active imagination, what they would call path working. So these path workings were, as you would do with tarot, or a Kabbalist might do it, a Hermetic Kabbalist. Actually, I talk about it like it's so common, but it's not a common thing, and it wasn't practiced at all before the Golden Dawn. They kind of, that practice emanated from their inner order teachings, how you would literally path working between the Sephira, or the Sephirot on the Tree of Life, on those paths. So it's funny, there's a little story about that. I think it was Henry Corbin. He he had some familiarity with the Golden Dawn. He was familiar with path working. I think he was somehow uh, in or around the group with Dion Fortune.
Hmm.
You know, Dion Fortune, her
Yes.
mystical Kabbalah, big book. But he was somehow in her group of friends or aware of her work, and he learned path working through them. It might have been her post schism group after the GD. But what happened was is he somehow got, you know, gained audience with Carl Jung very early on, and
Hmm.
Carl Jung appropriated the idea of active imagination from Golden Dawn path working
Oh, I
practices.
didn't know that.
Yeah, a transmission can actually be I'm not prepared to do it right now, but that can be substantiated that he got these ideas from Henri Corbin, who definitely got it from the Golden Dawn, and that informed, you know, a pretty
Wow.
significant chunk of his psychoanalysis.
Sure. So what you keep mentioning the schism that happened. So how long was the first period of the Golden Dawn, and maybe tell us a little bit about the schism, how it happened, and what was the effect of it?
Well, the sort Annie Horniman had a lot to do with that initial kind of fissure, you know, because cliques were starting to form. I already mentioned the Sphere, an inner order group headed up by Florence Farr, but Annie Horniman was, I think Mathers, he had a bone to pick with her over something. I don't remember exactly what, but he was not friendly to her. A lot of the people at Isis Urania Temple, the first temple in London, were they were behind Horniman, and Mathers had already left for Paris and started the, I think it was Hathor Temple
Mm.
there, and or yeah, and he was sort of in the process of converting everything to what they call Alpha et Omega, which is as we'll see, a post-schism order. Anyway, these fissures were starting to happen largely around Horniman, I think, initially,
Mm.
and then Yates got in on it, wrote some diatribe in her defense, I believe, and then you and then the sort of nail in the coffin was the Madame Horos affair. So as you know, around that time, it was kind of the ebbing of the spiritualist movement, particularly in America.
Mm.
And she was an American spiritualist, and she found herself in the UK traveling with a younger woman and a man, and they were shyster types. So they were
Mm.
you know, certainly just trying to make a quick buck through occult shenanigans, right? And definitely of the spiritualist variety, but sort of snake oil people, snake oil salesmen. And she, they were embroiled in this it was a sexual abuse scandal.
Ooh.
So that young woman, uh, there was some sort of sexual abuse involving her, and there was a giant court case, and everybody was sort of outed as being a member of this society. In fact, another component of this uh, schism, this big breakup, was that Westcott left some of his documents in a hansom cab, just some, carriage. He left his some Golden Dawn documents there. They got into the wrong hands. They
Mm.
must have had his name on them, but his boss found out. So Westcott was the London coroner at the time, a very prominent
Ooh.
position, a public position,
Right.
and he was one of the founders of the Golden Dawn. So it got back to, you know, those uh, his work, and all these people in the local government, they found that he was an occultist and a weirdo. So he was given an ultimatum to sort of walk away from the society, or to, lose his job. And now he couldn't do that. So he had to make some space. He didn't fully sever ties, but so all these things were kind of happening. It wasn't looking good. There was a very visible court case, and that's when you start to see most people just, bailed bailed altogether. But those who hung on sort of, that's where it splits into several different groups, like Falcon with the Dr. Falcon. I think he was the one who started the Stella Matutina,
Hmm.
Morning Star. And then there was, like we said, Mathers was in London and he started Alpha et Omega.
Hmm.
So there were various sort of Falcon again, like left right around that time. He went to New Zealand because there was, he started the Golden Dawn current in New Zealand, which was in fact the longest lasting. Um, you know, it's post schism and it is Stella Matutina material, but he brought that over around the turn of last century to New Zealand
Hmm.
and all the way up into the 70s, like 1978, I believe, some crazy long time.
Wow, that is long.
They had a Golden Dawn temple called Whare Ra. Now you'll see it spelt out sometimes. It's WHARE space RA, WHARE. A lot of people say Where Ra, but because it's in the Aboriginal language in New Zealand, the WH is pronounced like an F, like as in food. So
Okay.
Whare Ra. And yeah, that went on for quite a long time. In fact, after the schism, there was a temple in Chicago, I think, that went on for into the 30s or 40s. There were, of course, bastions of the GD tradition in Ireland, in Bristol, way out west, sort of, and a couple other. If I had to guess, I would say probably maybe 7 to 10
Hmm.
groups that carried on after the schism.
So when did the later interest develop then? Was it because of Regarde? What was the when did it sort of have its recapitulation and into modern times?
Right. So Aleister Crowley, who was a member, oh, I forgot to bring him up. He also had a lot to do with the schism because he was one of Mather's cronies, and he was sent to the Isis Uranian temple to acquire some documents and to sort of take control of that temple again. Which somehow he was kind of able to do for a bit. I'm not sure how one man could go there and do all, but he was he was a strange individual. So he was able to get these documents, and later, so he ended up turning on Mathers. He commissioned Mathers to translate the uh, Lesser Key of Solomon, the Goetia,
Hmm.
Lesser Key of Solomon. The Goetia is one of the 5 books of the Lesser Key, this early modern grimoire, and he turned on him. There was also a court case there because Mathers, I don't think, was compensated for his work or only partially compensated. And so Crowley has his post schism group called I think it's Astrum Argentium. So it's AA.
Hmm.
Nobody knows it, unless you're an initiate, you don't know what the AA stands for. But I think it's Astrum Argentium or something like that. Star of Silver, I want to say.
Hmm.
But so he had his group, and like I said, several people have had these groups going all the way up into the mid 20th century. But around I want to say 1940, late 30s, 1940, Crowley published the grade material, the outer order grade material of the Golden Dawn in his Equinox
Hmm.
magazine.
Hmm.
So that started kind of an interest that rekindled interest in the Golden Dawn as a working tradition, even though there were still a few embers here and there. That kind of rekindled things. Israel Regardi, as you mentioned, he was Crowley's secretary for a time. I want to say in the teens, 1910, 15, something like that. He was his secretary. And Regardi also put together that big expose on the Golden Dawn. It was actually Stella Matutina work, slightly different than first iteration Golden Dawn, only in very minor ways. But what you see there could more, in Regardi's book, could more accurately be called Stella Matutina. Uh, but yeah, of course, then kind of a period of dormancy, and then you get the occult esoteric revival in the 60s with the hippie era and people interested in astrology and tarot, and then all of a sudden kind of a rekindling of GD isms in whatever form.
Do you think that, or is it true that Aleister Crowley broke vows of secrecy to release the material? And because wasn't it secret before that? You had to be part of an order to get the material?
Yeah. So he should not have published that material. Neither should Regardi, because if both of them were properly initiated, there's a clause in there, and I feel like I could say this. There's a clause that says if you reveal this, it's right there. I want to say in the neophyte grade, during what's kind of an obligation or an oath, uh, you swear that if you reveal any of the material, that um, you're that a deadly and hostile current of will be set in motion. That's how it's worded almost
Wow.
exactly like that. A deadly and hostile current of will be set in motion. So it's not like I think there are gnarlier penalties in Masonry, actually. If you've heard the Masonic penalties at each of the degrees, they're very gruesome, very gory. But this one's comparatively tame, but also very frightening metaphysically. So if you
Right.
are the person who has an enchanted worldview, if you are a person who believes in these non-causal agencies or these supernaturally causal agencies, then you don't want a deadly and hostile current of will set in motion on you. That would be terrible.
That would be. So, what do you think then of people that are not initiated today that read the? I mean, I know there's at least a couple of books that have the Golden Dawn, all of the material and the grades, and what do you think of people that aren't initiated reading the material and even
You know,
working with it? I suppose.
well, first, they're not obligated to secrecy. So so that whole clause is kind of out the window. There's no penalty for that. I mean, it's just like anybody who reads Duncan's ritual, about Masonic ritual. It's a publicly published expose, and anybody can read it. But I would say that yes, I've heard people having some success with self-initiation in the Golden Dawn path, or what they call astral initiation, where you kind of put yourself through the grades. Um, I guess it can be done, but and again, I've heard of some people seeing some benefits from that or experiencing benefits from that, but I don't think there's much of a comparison to actually being initiated into the tradition and properly doing the grades in a temple with all the paraphernalia and regalia and a temple genius. Like each temple has its own genius, like a cult image, basically. And
Well, that's interesting. What does that mean exactly?
so just as in temples of old, Greco-Roman temples, each of them had in their sanctum sanctorum had a cult image, which would be like it could be an abstract sort of herm of stone, or it could be a detailed sculpture, right? But it was meant to represent a certain god or genius, the genius of that god. And the way that these cult images were sort of established was that they were, and this practice actually goes back to Egypt. In the Holy of Holies, in the center of the temples, they had their cult image there, usually in some sort of ark, with
Hmm.
there would be a couple of rings on either side, and they would put the wooden dowels through it and do a procession once a year, maybe on the day of that deity. But so yeah, they did rituals, to theurgic type rituals, to animate these statues. The opening of the mouth
Hmm.
actually is a statue,
Ah,
a reference to statue animation. So you see this in antiquity. Um, in, again, Egyptian and Greco-Roman temples, that they have this cult image. And it goes back, in fact, at least, I want to say, 12 to 1500 years BC,
Hmm.
that you see this practice. So, and probably much further. But anyway, so the Golden Dawn, because of Mather's, likely because of Mather's more than Westcott, but he sort of built in some of these old theurgic practices that, some of them survived through Agrippa.
Hmm.
Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa. He may or may not have had access to things like the Picatrix, but he certainly had Iamblichus, Proclus, Porphyry, and these Neoplatonists, right, who talk about statue animation and talk about theurgy. So he liked the idea of each temple, as temples of old always had, invariably having a central cult image, which is almost like the egregore of that temple. It's
Right.
the higher
Yeah.
genius of that temple. And they would, there would be a statue animation, and it has a name, and there's propitiations to the genius of the temple, and every where you make offerings and sort of sacrifices to these entities, you also reap the rewards of that relationship, because it's a tremendous source of power that can be shared among your temple mates.
I love that. Now, how do they determine what the genius is in the temple?
Mm. Well, it's usually in the temple name, and I'm sure the genius comes before the temple name, of course. But you could see, like, Isis Urania is
Ah,
a certain iteration of Isis. You know how all the gods and goddesses had epithets
right.
after their names. So depending on, if they were the genius loci of this place or that place, they had a sort of different iteration. Like Mars Ulterior was the Roman Mars. He was the genius or egregore of Rome. I think I'm saying that right. Mars Ulterior, I think,
Oh,
was
I
the
don't
name.
know. I'm sure that you're better at that than I am.
Well, well, so the point is that yeah, they would have, in the temple names would have usually the name of their genius. Nowadays, we kind of keep that secret. I know um, in my tradition, uh, mine is the Hermetic Society of the Golden Dawn. It's a kind of a restorative Golden Dawn order. I'd say there are probably 20 operative Golden Dawn style temples, or not temples, but traditions practicing right now. But ours is the Hermetic Society of the Golden Dawn, and our temple is named after our genius. We usually just say the letter M and then put a little therefore symbol, the
Hmm.
three dots. But so we, so why, the question was, why have the genius, or?
Well, how would they choose the genius? So
Oh,
what would be the method? Is it, and actually who would do it even?
so I can only say for us. I'm not sure how they chose. I imagine because of Mather's and his erudition, that he would do it sort of geographically. He would
Hmm.
probably choose by some astrogeography what was the pertinent entity for that area on the
Ah.
globe. I know that in our tradition, we use also star names for each of the temples. So the relationship between the stars on the celestial sphere is commensurate to the relationship between the temples on the terrestrial sphere. So our temple was named not by us, but by the imperator of the order of
Hmm.
our society, and it was sort of bestowed upon us. I have seen a temple or two pop up since we founded ours 5 years ago, and I don't think, they might have a little sway in who they can get, or there might be a discussion about it, but I'm pretty sure historically it's just something that's kind of bequeathed from
Ah.
on high.
Now, do you find that, based on your experience so far, that the current Golden Dawns that you know of are very active? Do they have trouble with people coming out for doing the rituals. I know some orders have had that struggle. Even with Freemasonry, they've had sometimes getting people to come out and do things, it has been a little more challenging.
Well, yeah, certainly COVID and the pandemic in general has had an effect on all of our activities, right? But uh, I'd say before, I mean, we're just as busy now as we were before. Um, so that kind of wore off, but I don't see a lasting effect in terms of our particular group. I think we just kind of had pressed the pause button for a year or so there, and now we're back in business. But and then as far as other Golden Dawn and Golden Dawn like groups, because there are a lot of those too, like
Right.
Builders of the Addendum,
Right.
OHM is another one, Fraternity of Hidden Light. There are several that are sort of based on the Golden Dawn model, like for instance having the Kabbalistic grade structure, or having outer order grades that are theoretical, and then having practical inner order grades. Like the basic chassis on which this whole thing operates is kind of pervasive in these magical societies today, and you simply can't escape the Golden Dawn influence. I mean, even in terms of the knowledge lectures,
Sure.
like it's the I mean, you have to know that stuff in order to meet proficiency to make the next grade. So it's like, it's pretty great though. I am very glad that we have, like in our literature, it says the work must be perfect. It says that. So when we hand in or test out of a particular grade, we have to know that knowledge lecture, just like in Masonry. We have to know how to
Right.
just recite it. We have to be able to say the whole thing, which is great because uh, the whole idea of these learning grades, the outer order grades, is that when you do get to practical theurgy, talisman making or divination or Enochian operations, and statue animation in the inner order, uh, you will have had this education in all the nuts and bolts of practical magical occultism. Uh, that goes back a long way, pre-Renaissance. I mean, but certainly in like Agrippa. I think that's kind of the high watermark in the grimoire tradition, because Agrippa in his 3 books really has, I mean, that's everything up to that point.
Right.
I mean, he left out very little in terms of Western occultism. I mean, that's so so you get something like Agrippa's 3 books, and then the Solomonic stuff we talked about, some of Dee's work, John Dee's work, and Francis Barrett's The Magus, which is kind of riffs on a lot of Agrippa's work. Anyway, this sort of stuff kind of funnels into the Golden Dawn tradition. And what I really love to say about the Golden Dawn, um, just in general, is that at that point in time, the 1890s, this golden age of the Golden Dawn, this really, pre-schism, but running strong, and for 10 years or so at that point. 1887 they started, so let's say around 1893, 95. That's in the heart of the sort of best era of the Golden Dawn, and I'd like to think of it as a concentration of the the Western esoteric traditions just bottlenecking at
Mm.
that point. Everything just kind of coming in, funneling up to this just great synchronization, so syncretized, so complete, because you had all the Agrippa, you had this grimoiric material, you even had the classic stuff, like we were talking about statue animation and
Right.
having a temple genius. There was just this period where the tarot was in there, the alchemy, the astrology, all the hermetic arts, Kabbalah was in there, the Egyptianisms, the Enochianisms, all of this stuff was woven together into such a great and comprehensive system that it's no wonder why we're still talking about it today. And it's no wonder that there are dozens of organizations that are patterned upon that. It was a magical time.
So really, so I always see it as kind of an esoteric renaissance, and I think that like I do tarot for a living, and one of the things I think, and my husband thinks, that people are always trying to make these new tarot decks, and believe me, I think some of them are kind of cool and quirky, but they're not. They can't surpass the tarot that came out of that time, whatever tarot you want to look at. And I think people are trying to do that rather than I gleam still from them all that rich knowledge and experience. I think we haven't even tapped fully into it myself.
Yeah, you know, we've got kind of, I guess it's a little bit of a joke in our society where one of the chiefs of there's chiefs who operate these things. One of the order chiefs and I have a little kind of we joke about which tarot to use because he's a big proponent. He happens to like the Builders of the Atom Paul Foster Case deck that you color in, which is great. You know, obviously very derivative of the Rider-Waite, you know, only some slight differences. I like that you have to color it in. I think Builders of the Atom is a great group, but I remind him sometimes jokingly that, you know, we're a restorative order. And in being a restorative order, we don't even go back to the Rider-Waite deck, Waite Coleman Smith deck. We go back to the Marseille. So our particular temple out here in Phoenix, you know, from the beginning, we were using Marseille because they would have been using one of two decks. The original Golden Dawn members, 1887 to 88, would have been using either the Marseille deck or maybe the Worth deck.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
He's definitely an interesting. We want to do a show on him. I just discovered how interesting he was. Reading it they republished Tarot of the Magicians. I don't know, recently, and his book, and what an interesting fellow. I mean, just what he says about magic and divination alone in that book is really, really wonderful, I would say. So yeah, I could understand why you would sort of go back to that deck, the Marseille deck. It's a lovely, and I have the rendition by Yov Ben. I forget.
Oh yeah,
it's so
CBD.
Yeah, the CBD is really lovely. I really like it. And I liked his book actually. It's really interesting how he approached the imagery and things like that. I thought it was really, really good, and it worked. I mean, he actually does look at the symbols and look at the colors, and he talks about it. So I really like that book a lot. So do you think then, what do you think in terms of where the Golden Dawn is going? Do you think it's growing? Are enough young people getting involved? What is your own vision of where the Golden Dawn could go and how it might impact society?
Well, I think if we zoom out a bit, I was just listening to something they were talking. I was listening to Chris Brennan's podcast. He's a Hellenistic astrologer, and he had a guest on there, and they were talking about certain transits, certain outer planet transits. I also study traditional astrology. I only use the 7 visible planets in my practice. I do from Hellenistic to the Renaissance, and we didn't have Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto then, and there are reasons why I do. Anyway, I'm digressing, but there is an outer order transit that started happening recently. Not outer order, outer planet, trans-Saturnian planet transit, like a certain conjunction, or I forget what aspect they're making, but this seems to be supporting this new fascination with Western esotericism, or even just occultism. So people are definitely more interested in astrology, probably even more so than they were in the 70s.
Oh yeah,
it was just ubiquitous. So astrology is massive right now.
yes.
Tarot is as big as ever. You know, you ought to know that, you know,
Yes.
more than most. So tarot is just massive. I mean, a bazillion tarot books. So we're kind of riding this wave right now where I'm not an anthropologist, so I can't say what precipitated this, but we do know that people are less likely to be involved in organized religion right now yet they still are searching for meaning, right? So
Mm.
how do these people, your typical person, they're not willing to necessarily buy the whole Judeo-Christian package per se, but they still maybe believe in somewhat of an enchanted worldview, or they don't know and it's attractive to them, or they're interested in the aesthetics of it. But that isn't to say it's merely superficial. If somebody's just interested in the aesthetics of alchemy, they
Mm.
like the way the alembics look, they like the paraphernalia, um, that doesn't mean it's necessarily superficial. That just means, because something's drawing them to
Right.
that, just like we were talking about what's drawing, you to this tradition. So there's like my first story, going
Yes.
to that temple.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think because we're in a time where people are definitely searching for meaning and purpose, and there's a lot of strangeness in the air, and a lot of sort of unpredictability, but also uncertainty. So I think that it's a great time for the Golden Dawn. I think this is a, a better time. There probably hasn't been a better time in 100 years.
Mm. Yeah, astrology especially, I think tarot has caught on, but astrology, when you look at so much depth in astrology, like the whole movement of the Hellenistic movement that's been, I'm aware of Chris Brennan, I follow his podcast, and Demeter George, and it's been, you meet people, they know so much about their chart. When I was first in the 80s, you'd be lucky if people knew their moon and ascendant, and now they know everything about their chart, and it's so you can really see it's caught on a deep level, and tarot too, but not quite yet the way astrology is in terms of the depth of it. Tarot is still a little bit more flimsy, and so we'll see how that goes over time, if some of it will sort of trend away or not. I mean, it will never go out of style, tarot. But that's interesting, because I mean, I don't know why I had the impression that magical orders were on the decline. And I didn't really, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I do know people that have been dedicated to Boda and some of the other ones you mentioned earlier, and they're still really involved. And the Fraternity of Hidden Light, I've met people that I really like from that order here in Santa Monica. They meet at Michael's Lodge. So it's nice to hear that you feel it's more of a heyday for the Golden Dawn.
Yeah, I feel like, the environment is right. And the one kind of drawback is that we're so particularly after the pandemic, um, people would rather, work from home, and they're maybe less social. I don't know if we're going to have a kind of a, a, a recoil back to people actually willing to go out for a few hours to go to like a tarot meditation or a hermetic Kabbalah study group or things like that. But we've been having those here. We have sort of a porchway group here in Phoenix, just called, innocuously titled the Hermetic Study Group is all we call it, right?
Mm.
And it's sort of our outward face. We meet at a metaphysical bookstore here in town, and people show up, and those who have an interest and sort of proclivity and sort of apt to display some aptitude for the material will sometimes get an invite to look deeper into becoming a member of the temple. Now, that's the other thing, and we know this in Masonry more than ever. We know this in Freemasonry, that you can't just let anybody in, because it will really affect what you're trying to do. We saw that for almost 100 years with Freemasonry, and it all but turned the whole operation anemic. Basically,
Mm-hmm.
it became this just like Kiwanis style thing, with all the innards sort of scooped out of it, right? And
Right.
it was only really over the last, maybe I'd say really 10 years, really over the last 10 years, that we get this explosion of literature, where we get Masonicons, where people show up for these conferences that are not just business meetings and things like that. Plus, in the lodge experience, and I say this because it's echoing the Magical Society
Sure.
thing, it's kind of the same. So I think, yeah, it is just how there's a tendency now for restorative Freemasonry. They say the Masonic Restoration Foundation is a very popular thing, and people are starting to turn back to smaller lodges, um, more more sort of formalism, tuxes and music and good food and an emphasis on good ritual. I say this because our Golden Dawn Society, the Society of the Golden Dawn, is sort of mirroring that very ethos,
Mm.
except in the Golden Dawn tradition. So we insist on, good paraphernalia, regalia. Our pillars that we handmade are replicas to spec of the Isis Urania pillars.
Wow.
We took our time to make they're the same specs, like completely. And and we've got to be careful on who you let in. There's a warning in one of the Masonic lectures. I think it might be the apron lecture, and Michael could probably corroborate this, but it says somewhere in there, um, 100 men could not undo the damage done by one sort of bad man. That's a bad paraphrase, but you understand
Yeah.
what I'm saying. 100 good men can't undo the damage done by one bad man. So don't, that means be very careful on who you let in, because that's also feeding your egregore. That's also contributing. It could be cancerous to your genius.
Well, unfortunately, it did happen at Michael's Lodge, and it's amazing how it was started with one person, though it became more than one person. It changed the whole genius of that lodge, and I don't think that lodge is alone in that happening. But it's one of those. It's a good warning, in the sense that you have to sort of see what kind of character, what their intentions are, and what your own unique lodge is trying to represent, because it does seem like I'm sure it's true with the Golden Dawn. There, you have different geniuses, you're going to have different energies, and you're trying to, get people that want to work with that energy instead of come in and say, hey, this is the energy I'm bringing in and I'm going to destroy that energy. Because that's really, to me, what it's about too, is respecting what that temple is, and not saying, maybe you maybe even have a good idea for a temple, but you don't just go in and take over, and that can happen.
Well, I'll send you a petition then. You're the type of person we're looking for.
Well, this is the one quick thing I wanted to ask, and it is, we have like a couple minutes left, but the secret chiefs, are they real? Someone asked me that once, and I didn't know how to answer. I said, well, I don't know. I'm not a member of the Golden Dawn. I just know, so the idea of them.
So, I mean, that could, kind of spiral off into a lot of well, yes, I would say yes, they are real, right? We talk about them, we name them, yes, they are real. So, well, we don't name them specifically, but when we talk about it, we sort of give body to that idea. I don't think that there are three tangible, flesh and bone chiefs, that are the secret chiefs, but I do believe that they're an idea, much like an egregore, a tripartite egregore, maybe something like that. I mean, it is a thought form that we have collectively fed for 130 years or however long it's been. So I would say yes on that sort of level, and on not only in the macro, like a collective thought form projected out there, but also on the micro psychological level. We've also sort of made them. So there's this sympathetic micro macro relationship in our unconscious together as a group. We know about the chiefs, and we could perhaps even meet them on that plane,
That's a wonderful answer, and I can definitely get behind that. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. That was just really fascinating. I really did learn a lot of new things about the Golden Dawn, so thank you so much.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Krista and Michael, and yeah, it's been a pleasure.
And join us next time as we continue to explore the esoteric and the obscure together. Have a wonderful, magical week.